All right, today we're diving into a specific historical account of how two major Palestinian cities, Haifa and Safad, were essentially emptied out during the 1948 war. Everything we're going to talk about is based directly on a text detailing those events. So let's kick things off with just one number, a single powerful number.
75,000. Just let that number sink in for a second.
So what is that number? Well, that's how many Palestinians were living in Haifa, which was Palestine's main port city, right at the start of 1948. We're talking about a huge, bustling community.
And yet, just a few months later, they were almost all gone. So the big question this account really digs into is, what happened to them?
Okay, so according to the source material, the story doesn't just start in April 1948. To really get what happened, we've got to rewind a bit, because the community was already in a really tough spot.
The text points out that even before the main event, back in late 1947, a lot of the city's Palestinian elite, the wealthy, influential families, had already left. And we're not talking a small number either, somewhere between 15 and 20,000 people. So what does that mean? It means the roughly 60,000 people who stayed behind were suddenly without their leaders. They were completely exposed.
And this quote right here, it's just wow. It's from a telegram sent by a local leader, Fareed Saad, saying, "It is good the Jews do not know the truth." The truth he was talking about was that their leadership had totally collapsed. But here's the kicker. The source makes it very clear that the Jewish forces absolutely knew. They knew exactly how fragile the situation was.
All right, so that's piece number one. The next crucial piece of this story involves the British, who were technically still in charge of the city. You see, for a while, the British troops had been acting as a kind of physical buffer, separating the Jewish and Arab neighborhoods. But things started to change, and fast. As you can see here, in February, they suddenly moved up their withdrawal date. Then on April 18th, the British general, a guy named Stockwell, meets with Jewish authorities. And just 2 days after that, he tells them he's pulling his troops out of those key buffer zones, a huge, game-changing decision. And the source is really direct about what this meant. This move, pulling the troops out, basically removed the only thing standing in the way of a full-on assault on the Palestinian areas of Haifa. For the 50,000-plus people still living there, the road was now wide open.
So, with that buffer gone, the Jewish forces launched their offensive. And the name they gave it is packed with meaning, Operation Bur HaKametz, which translates to Cleansing the Leaven.
Just look at the numbers here. It really paints a picture of the military situation on the ground. The source describes a massive imbalance. On one side, you have 2,000 well-equipped troops from the Carmeli Brigade, and on the other, maybe 500 Arab volunteers with way worse weapons and not a lot of ammo.
On paper, the operation's goal was pretty straightforward: take control of the Palestinian parts of Haifa.
But that name, Cleansing the Leaven, it's not just a military code name. It's also a direct reference to the Jewish religious practice for Passover, where you get rid of all the leavened bread in your home. The author of our source calls the choice of name brutally appropriate, because this operation, to, in effect, cleanse Haifa of its Arabs, kicked off on April 21st, the very eve of Passover.
And the orders given to the troops, well, they leave nothing to the imagination. This is a direct quote from the text, from the officer in charge, Mordecai Makhlef, who, by the way, later became the chief of staff for the entire Israeli army. The instructions were as direct and as harsh as they sound.
As you can imagine, when those orders were carried out, it caused absolute panic. It led to a mass exodus of civilians, which all came to a head in some truly terrible scenes down at the city's port.
The account lays out a very specific chain of events. So first, people are running from their homes in terror. Then, loudspeakers tell them to go to the old marketplace, which is right by the port. But once this huge crowd gathers there, the source says the Carmeli Brigade set up mortars on the hills overlooking them and began shelling the area. The stated goal? To make sure that everyone fled in one direction and one direction only, towards the sea.
And the sheer human cost of that chaos is just captured so vividly in this survivor's account. It's hard to even read. People were desperate to get on the boats, which led to absolute disaster. Just a few days after all this, Golda Meir, who was a top Zionist leader at the time, visited the now empty Arab neighborhoods, and the source includes her reaction. She saw homes where it looked like life had just frozen in an instant. It's a powerful image. The author mentions that it reminded her of stories of pogroms, but also notes that this observation didn't change anything about the larger operation that was underway.
Now, the story doesn't end in Haifa. The source makes a point of showing that this wasn't some one-off event. It then turns to the fall of Safad, another big Arab town, which followed a pattern that's, well, it's disturbingly similar.
And look, once again, we see this huge military mismatch. You've got 1,000 well-trained Palmach troops on one side and about 400 Arab volunteers on the other, and only half of them even had guns. The author uses these examples from Haifa and now Safad to really push back against that classic David versus Goliath story you often hear about the 1948 war.
And the outcome? It was pretty much the same as in Haifa. The Palmach forces first took the villages around the town, and then they focused on Safad itself, driving out almost every single one of its 9,500 Arab residents.
And this is where we're going to end it, with this final quote. It's an entry from David Ben-Gurion's own diary from June 5, 1948, and the tone is just so bureaucratic, so matter-of-fact. He just notes that the last 100 or so elderly people left in Safad were expelled to Lebanon. It's presented as this final, quiet, administrative act in the emptying of a city. And it really leaves you to think about the stark picture painted by this historical account.